This Idle News Podblast contains significant story spoilers for the game Her Story. If you have not played it to completion, please don't listen to this until you do.
Oh man, I have not played it.
Jake, you better get off this podcast.
I don't want to be.
now.
I don't want to be the podcast equivalent of like the black and white video in an infomercial. The what not to do guy. So I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, get out of here.
Okay, bye.
Welcome to the Idle News Podblast. Her Story Spoilercast. Long promised, finally delivered.
Woo.
Yeah, I'm Chris Remo.
I'm Danielle Riendo.
I'm Steve Gaynor.
And we are also joined by
Sarah Argodale.
Yay!
who I played through the whole game with. We were taking notes and...
I was taking notes.
You were taking notes, that's true, and I was typing stuff in, and we were sort of shouting stuff out together and playing through the game together, and you were here in the office, and we figured, why not put you on this podcast?
Yeah,
yeah,
correct.
Impressions. Yep. Her Story impressions.
Mm-hmm. So what did you guys think about this game, just generally, you know, all things considered?
I thought it was... Well, I mean, we touched on this a tiny bit.
So we don't have to go into a huge amount of detail. But
I really thought it was a pretty amazing example and a pretty pure example of interactive storytelling. Like maybe one of the best that I have experienced myself.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, you know, my girlfriend introduced me to this game and said, this is one of my favorite games of the year. Play it, without telling me anything.
Right.
And I sort of was playing it and taking notes and got so into it and thought it was this really kind of awesome melodrama mystery hybrid that also is kind of, you know, a desktop simulator, which is an interesting way of framing everything. And I kept, you know, sort of calling back to her, trying to kind of get hints. I was like, there's something going on with this, you know, like, I don't know what's going on with this mirror thing. There's something there. There's some kind of symbolism. And she was just like on the bed giving no shits, just being like, just keep playing. Just whatever you think. Just keep writing down stuff. I'm not going to tell you anything, which was like the best possible thing for playing this game. Pretty much by myself, but also with like someone who is just like dedicated to me having a pure experience and was not going to let me not have that experience.
Right. Well, that's probably how most people played it because, you know, why would you... Like, most people don't have someone over their shoulder spoiling things,
Sure,
right?
yes.
And, like, the mode you were in during what you were describing, that was when I liked the game the most.
Yes.
Is when I hadn't finished anything yet, but we were, like, in the middle of it and throwing out theories and sort of arguing about what could be happening and trying to, you know, find new things. And it felt, like, so tantalizing and so, like, interacting with it is so satisfying. And... you know, the way it pieces stuff out is just very unlike how most games piece this stuff out. And I personally really didn't think it stuck the landing, and it really soured my overall emotional reaction to the game, even though I still really
what aspect of it? Do you mean the actual resolution of the story?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, two things. I mean, the resolution of the story itself. Okay, so this is a spoiler. It's so hard for me to get over my natural like resistance to talk about spoilers on podcasts.
We're going to
take so much shit for it.
Spoilerize
Actually, you know,
the shit out of this thing.
Before we get there, Steve and Sarah, why don't you guys just say what you thought about the game briefly?
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think I pretty much agree with what Chris was saying in that the ending kind of retroactively made me feel more disappointed in everything that had come before, but I really did enjoy the 3.5 hour experience that we had leading.
Well, so the same question as before. I feel like there's two things you could be referring to there. And one is what the actual like video clips added up to as a story that you surmised. The other is, I think it's just after you've unlocked a certain number of clips,
right?
You get an IM from somebody, and
I
they
didn't
say,
like either.
Okay,
so I was wondering which of those you were referring to.
I felt it failed in both regards, unfortunately. Yeah.
So my impressions, I guess not very different. Actually, so my arc with this game was I started playing it, and I was going through clips, and I was finding stuff. And I didn't exactly bounce off of it, but I like put it away and kind of had to make myself come back to it a few different times. And the reason specifically was because I didn't have any idea what the progression structure to the game was at
That's
all.
what I loved about
which
it the most.
which is fine.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a sense of purpose when I was playing it to and I hadn't in the sessions I played, I hadn't gotten to any of those story points where I was super hooked on like, I think I found like something I want to like pull out. I was sort of like, okay, I'm looking at stuff. I think I'm getting some ideas, but I don't really know where this is going. I would kind of walk away from it and be like, basically, I would see someone mention it again, like online or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I should go back. And after a while, I got to one of those points where I was like, oh wait, I'm putting enough things together. Then I do want to know, did they grow up together? Like that kind of thing. Yeah. And started really trying to find specific answers to things that were hinted to that I wasn't sure about yet. And then it all started coming together. The thing that I think I would have wanted structurally, considering what the creator Sam Barlow actually did with it, was it felt very late and very out of nowhere that the IM person was like, hey, I'm messaging with you on an IM, etc. Like it was binary, it was like they did it once and it was basically, are you done playing the game yet or not? And that was the only thing. And I would have really appreciated if they introduced that concept much earlier without it being like, do you want to quit yet? But just sort of like, you unlock some clips and this guy IMs you and it's sort of like, hey, how's your research going? And you can be like, or is your research going well? And you can answer yes or no because it's just a yes or no. And you're like, oh, okay, so I get it. So I'm going to unlock things. And that's kind of like, this guy's going to IM me over time.
Well, they
and I would feel like
that with the... Not with the IMs, but with
the
face. Yeah, I feel like that came at pivotal story moments.
I agree. Yeah.
Oh, man. So my reaction is I wish they would have introduced that never.
Yeah.
I wish they would have waited until I was dead to introduce that. Because I hated it so much.
Really?
Sarah, you'll probably remember how wrong I was about this when you asked me, like we started playing the game and you're like, so
how will we know when the end is?
We know when we're done.
Right.
And I was so convinced that I was totally incorrect, but I was so convinced that I'm like, oh, there's not going to be anything. We're just a database, and that's it. That's the whole game is just this database, and it's up to you when you think when you're done with it or when you think you've figured something out. And I thought it was going to be more ambiguous as to what actually happened, and I was so, and it's my fault, I guess, for assuming too much, and maybe I was disappointed only because I was so excited about that structure. Like the very first thing I did when I sat down at the game was delete the pre-filled search term of murder and replace it with games. And I found a guy. No, well, she was talking about. I actually can't remember what exactly she was talking about.
The pub that they went to. She
was talking about like an Amstrad game or some shit, like a ZX Spectrum game or something, some like ancient thing, and I'm like, what? I just typed in games and I found this thing and some lady talking about a Amstrad. Like, what is happening? I was so excited about that component of it, and I remained extremely excited about that. Just that method of interacting without being given any explicit motivation or structure for like 80% of the experience, and I loved the sensation of not quite knowing what was going on, but starting to piece together theories, like, is it really this weird twins thing or is it like multiple personalities? I was totally convinced that it was a multiple personality story, and was just kind of bummed out when eventually, like, it seems to me, I don't know if you all agree about this. To me, it seemed pretty clear that the game explicitly intends you to understand that this was two women separated at birth, stolen by a weird lady who raised her in an attic.
See, I felt the same way, but then when I said that to people online, people had some pretty convincing arguments.
Well, how do they
explain not being that.
The fingerprints then? Because
that was one of the things that people brought up, and I don't remember how that was resolved.
Yeah, I actually kind of thought it was more purposeful that people could debate it. I actually thought it was very
I thought it was
much
going to be that, but by the time I was done, I was like, nope.
So what was the fingerprint thing specifically? I don't remember all the specifics.
I forget which personality or twin they're supposed to be interviewing, but I think it's the meeker of the two, and the cops. Well, in the game,
Hannah
you never.
or Eve,
hear what the cops are asking her. You only hear her responses. So
which I thought was cool and good, by the way.
I thought that was cool,
too. That was
too.
a specific decision that was made, and I thought it was a good and cool decision. Even though some people kind of said, like, there's no way that makes sense. They would just have video running. Why would you not hear the guy?
But whatever. It was a cool...
I thought it was
I totally agree.
Cool.
It was cool having to figure out what they asked instead of just hearing it.
So presumably one of the cops is asking or telling her some information about finding an extra set of fingerprints in the parents' house. And I think that's pretty much the whole conversation, where the twin then says, well, how do you explain, the other fingerprints? So it's possible that the fingerprints don't belong to a twin. It's just a completely unrelated set. But I feel like that since that's the only instance that they're ever brought up in the game, it's never explained again. It's just kind of a flimsy example to use to maybe still hinge this whole multiple personality possibility on. And I think that's pretty conclusive that they're supposed to be two different women.
I sort of weirdly thought, so the reason why I thought it was explicit, the only thing explicit was that it wasn't explicit, basically, that because there were sort of things going in both, in favor of both of those. And I was a hardcore multiple personality proponent. And my girlfriend
I wanted to be so
was
bad.
a hardcore twins proponent. And then I started going on. And then I started arguing myself into like a frenzy. So, it's obviously been a little while since this game came out, and I've cooled a little bit on sort of how excited I was about I think I just got so excited about feeling like an actual little detective.
Totally.
And that it just really evokes that so much more than any other game mechanic has ever done effectively. And maybe I've cooled a little bit on this because even myself knowing multiple personalities as they're sort of as it's shown in TV or movies, it pretty much doesn't actually exist.
Fictionalized version.
Dissociative identity disorder is a thing, maybe, but it almost never presents itself any possible way that melodrama uses. And I just started thinking of this in terms of this is just melodrama. Like, if I can sort of swallow the fiction that multiple personalities or magical twins that somehow grew up, somehow a 5-year-old decided with another 5-year-old to have this brilliant plan, and one of them lives in the attic and the parents don't know about it, and that, I didn't know which one was more unbelievable.
That's actually the thing. Okay, so to me, I knew which one felt more unbelievable to me, and it was the twins one.
Exactly, me too.
But that was also the one I feel like the game lends more credence to, and I kind of let's just say, for the sake of argument, because it's totally reasonable that this might be the case. Like, let's say you are intended to be unsure as to which is conclusively true. Like, that's fine. Like, I'll go with that for a moment. Except that you're asking me to ambiguously waffle between one thing that I can get on board with and another which is so preposterous. Yeah. Because it's true that the sort of dissociative identity disorder is like, it's medically kind of ambiguous itself, right? Like, it's difficult to attach consistent diagnosis and so on. But I can understand it within the rules of like pop psychology. Absolutely, and sort of thing. Yeah. Whereas like the twins thing is just like, okay, it's just
so
how do you actually it's so hard for me to swallow that. Like, it's so difficult for me to swallow that even in a melodramatic setting, because it seems so over the top. And the thing that really makes it tough for me to swallow is that I spent the entire game doing the most mundane shit imaginable, which is good. That's not a criticism, but it puts me in the frame of mind of someone who's not like watching Lost. I'm like, I'm engaging in a police procedural, basically, or like
so you're looking
a
for
really
clues,
tiny version of it. And I want to experience something that I feel like I can actually puzzle through in a way that like kind of tracks to the experience that my brain is having.
It makes
and
logical sense.
I didn't feel that about Weird Attic Twins.
Yeah, you're not in the frame of mind to believe Weird Attic Twins.
But I think that's why they keep pushing the fairy tale angle. That's like your hint into okay, that there's more going on in this story than just the real world.
And I totally took that as evidence that she has a multiple personality, that she has this delusional fantasy that has to do with sort of how she switches or when she switches.
Also, I mean, I'm still on board with I want it to be multiple personalities, but I feel like that extra element kind of adds this less than real kind of atmosphere to the game.
Yeah, and again, I totally see where you're coming from. I guess to sort of what Steve was saying earlier about, wishing that they would have introduced this other structural element earlier, I guess in that interpretation, I wish that stuff had been more front and center earlier as well. So I would have, so I kind of framed myself a bit more for that. Although just on a separate note, just in terms of, I don't want to just say negative things about the game because the overwhelming percentage of the time I spent with this was me just like totally enraptured. You just even saying Fairy Tale and then me thinking of her playing that song
Oh
about
my God.
the sort of
The
The
dead
wind in the
sister.
rain.
the wind in the rain, and then
wind in the
there's
rain.
a moment where she's kind of just like I'm actually getting a physical chill down my spine as I remember this, specifically because of this one tiny little moment where she sings the verse about like holding her under the water and drowning her, and she just has a little flicker of a smile.
She's singing a song about killing
Yeah,
a sister.
and then keeps going, and it was like just that little bit of performance destroyed me. Like it was so creepy in the exact correct way. It like just thinking about it now, I'm just like getting those chills again. It's amazing. Yeah.
So here's a completely I haven't thought this through at all because I just thought of it while we were talking about this. But thought experiment: is it possible both things are false? Could the
And it's
fiction
just something entirely different.
could the fiction be that this character basically has made up both of these things as a cover to convince the
totally.
cops that
And I kind of
that a
like
very
that.
very straightforward
Yeah.
thing
I
like
yeah.
she killed her husband, period. She's probably kind of unbalanced and is presenting both that she has this fictional twin she knows they'll never be able to find because she knows she doesn't actually have a fictional twin, and kind of presenting as having multiple personality. Like, I hadn't thought of this till we were talking, but could she be like, in a calculating way, actually have made up both of these fictions?
Like that Edward Norton movie from back in the day.
Doesn't the like Glasgow driving stuff doesn't her alibis basically check out there in terms of driving the car up and being in both places at
in the
once?
hospital or
I thought that actually was like pretty.
We never
understood to be pretty straightforward.
Though conclusively, because since we never get to hear what the cops say, we never have access to whatever evidence they might have. We only have kind of her word, and she never says like, "Oh, you couldn't prove my alibi." So it's possible. I mean, it's totally possible that.
I mean, I like that interpretation as well. Certainly.
It might be the most satisfying. Actually,
I'm gonna read a piece of reader mail. This isn't like reader mail section, but I'm just going to insert this in because it's kind of relevant to a couple things we've talked about, and I just think it's interesting. Taylor Phillips writes, "Hey Thumbs, my work involves using search terms to review electronically stored information during criminal investigations.
Wow.
My day job doesn't necessarily make me better at her story, but it gave me an immediate appreciation for why the only 5 videos mechanic is so important. For example, during early case assessment, we may have hundreds of thousands of documents, meaning millions of pages, that have been pulled from relevant custodians, obviously vastly more than the number of videos in her story. However, with modern search tools and without an artificial limit of 5 documents per hit, I can often catch a significant percentage of the most crucial documents with about the same amount of time it took me to beat her story. In addition to basic search terms, data can be sliced using Boolean search terms, conversation, participants, dates, domains, file paths, and other metadata. Quick note, as is probably obvious, this better describes corporate fraud investigations than investigations of violent crime, and also is a slightly better description for what company counsel does than what the government does. As you can probably imagine, most searches involve terms specific to the particular allegations. That said, I have a default set of terms I usually run on all new datasets. George Carlin's 7 dirty words, with some updating to account for the parlance of our times. As I'm sure most folks playing her story figured out, it can be tricky to craft search terms that are both relevant but sufficiently precise to pull back a reasonable number of hits. In other words, searching for accounting in an accounting fraud case would result in a hopelessly high number of hits. In contrast, expletives are rarely used on work accounts. Also, there's a remarkably high correlation between someone being stressed out or angry enough to type out a swear word and being stressed out or angry about a fraud unraveling. Cheers, Taylor.
Huh.
P.S. In her story, I'm on Team Twins. Fingerprints were the clincher for me. A, the third set found in the house, and B, I assumed the detective tested her cup on July 2nd, as he apparently said he was going to do, leading to her huffy departure. And even after that, he's still pushing the twin theory. Wouldn't make a lot of sense to do that if he'd gotten fingerprint results confirming he'd been interviewing a single person." Anyway, I thought that was a really good email.
Yeah,
That's great.
Very relevant.
There were definitely physical. There were physical elements that made. I ended up landing in thinking it must be twins as well, until kind of floating this third theory of maybe both of them are intentionally false. But like when I finished it, I was on twins for like a couple of reasons. One being when she had the black eye at one point, it was gone, completely gone very soon after. Like the next interview,
There's
I
the
think was like a
tattoo
couple
thing,
of days
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
and she had no black eye whatsoever. And then also, I believe chronologically, it shows her bare arm, then her bare arm with a tattoo, then her bare arm without a tattoo again later. And I'm like, I guess she could have. I mean,
She could have been drawing them.
it looks
whatever,
like a fake tattoo, but I assume that was just production values,
Yeah,
not like in
yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
But maybe in fiction, she had a fake tattoo
And she
on
was
to
like,
try to throw him off.
I need to be person A or B today. You know, and she's thinking about it.
So real
But-
quick, actually, I'm just going to read. I'm not going to read this entire email because it's long. But Claire Hosking writes, "Good day, Thumbs.
Oh,
I
hey,
saw you were
Claire.
going to talk about her story, so I thought I'd send you some thoughts because I felt strongly about it. Like many people, I thought this mechanic was amazing and the sense of discovery was fantastic. I was less impressed with the story you discover. The gothic plot of baby-stealing midwives and hidden twins seems propelled by high cliché and convenience, not character, circumstance, place, and culture. It seemed there were three possible explanations for the story, and I wanted to read this because, Steve, it adds the one that you proposed. There is one woman who is faking multiple personality disorder to escape the murder charge. There are twins pretending to be one person, or there is one woman who has multiple personality disorder. I didn't find any of them very satisfying." Anyway, she explains why she didn't find any of these satisfying, and it covers a decent amount of ground that we have. But in any case, that is probably something that is folded into the overall kind of theories and discussions about the game.
Yeah.
I will throw in briefly this as well. I don't know if you all play the little mini game that's sort of included on the desktop, but that seemed
yeah.
to me to be like the
not
most
really.
heavy-handed.
Wait, explain what this was.
So it's basically a little. It's not chess, but it's
It's called the Mirror Game,
the
and
Mirror
it's much
Game.
closer to Minesweeper. Than
yeah, it's like
anything.
Minesweeper, and you play as both player 1 and player 2, basically playing this little asynchronous, competitive multiplayer game. And to me, it was the most heavy-handed thing for like, oh, she's clearly multiple personalities because you are now being her playing multiple personalities on the same game. I don't know. I thought
I
that
opened it
the
once
game
up
was
and I forgot
building
about
up
it,
to
actually.
that
Yeah,
somehow, and was sort of including that. The more I've thought about it in the last sort of month, the more I've liked that third explanation of like she's just a mastermind who is faking
just
this
total
entire thing.
Gone Girl.
Gone girl, exactly. She's just
I
a gone
wish.
girl.
She
style.
gone girl
Yeah.
the shit out of
Well,
you.
how does that explain the very end then with the daughter, or is that just
That she got put away, I guess. Even despite her masterminding, she, they saw through her somehow, and she got put away, and the daughter still was born
in jail?
in jail,
Yeah.
and probably taken away because that's typically what happens.
Yeah.
Is that would that be what would have had to have happened? Well, no. Why couldn't she?
She
have
just
been,
committed other crimes.
Well, no. Why couldn't she have been released? It was never shown that she was like arrested for the.
It was
murders
never.
at
It was
the
never
end.
shown.
Yeah, but
I
they
guess-
say, like, does this make you understand why your mother did what she did?
Yeah.
So presumably the
But that-
mom's just out of the picture for
But that
whatever
doesn't
reason.
necessarily mean. Does this make you understand why she murdered Simon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
True.
it doesn't.
I think it was. I think that was one of the things that was less ambiguous. Was like, was she ever actually charged? Were they like, I guess we can't
Yeah.
put anything on this
We
lady?
can't
Maybe we
stick
can,
her
but
with
she
this.
didn't like actually get convicted. I don't know.
Yeah. That's
Maybe
fair.
this entire meta commentary, to take it an even further level, is Sam Barlow saying the justice system sucks because detectives just build a case based on whatever is convenient for them and what they like the most. And this is what you like the most, are these goofy fucking explanations of something. So there you go, justice system. Bleh. Might be
Probably
giving
not
him
what he
too
was
much
saying.
credit. But
Might have been justice system bleh was.
that's the whole
Could have
thing.
been the takeaway.
That's the entire
I'd
thing.
believe it. Something that, speaking of the search terms that that the guy was talking about from his own job, something that I enjoyed about her story is that afterwards I realized that if you just search the title of the game, 2 of the most poor here's what
crazy.
happened video
actually
clips
never
come
That's
occurred
up.
to me.
great.
If
Yeah.
you just search her story, the 2 clips that come up are the one where she tells the whole thing about the midwife stealing the baby, and then the one where she says her story is she wore the wig and got the ring from Simon and flipped out and killed him. So you just search
Right.
the title of the game and like
It's
the
like
spoiler
major
video clips
things.
come up, which
Yeah.
is awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
When I was kind of thinking about how this game was constructed, I sort of assumed that Sam Barlow must have just absolutely rigorously considered how to sort of rank these, the search results such that he was pretty confident people would find stuff in the right order, within the sort of 5 video limit, not right order, but like would have things basically follow a progression of not being able to find important things just totally arbitrarily and
Right.
as a matter of course
That
without
really-
having specific enough search terms to drill
Yeah.
down. And it
Important stuff couldn't have really like the first thing you think of terms in
Right.
them. Yeah.
And it sounds like I'm sure he must have had to do a fair amount of that, but based on interviews I read, it sounds like less than I would have expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing is that because the video clips are so short, that it's like even when you do get one of like the spoiler ones that's just like here's some plot points that happened. If it's the first one you get, you have no idea
It's
who
true,
they're
yeah.
talking about or
Yeah.
why or what. You can be like, wait, so when did that happen and who was wearing a wig? Like there's still a
Yeah.
ton of context that
true.
you need.
Yeah.
So I thought that was actually something that was one of the most interesting things about the game structurally and mechanically was like I feel like there was an incredible amount of courage and trust in the player to say like
Definitely.
if you just
Yes.
search a search term that takes you to the end, that's fine because the play experience isn't going to fall down based on that because you have to have found all this other stuff to even know what it means. And I'm just going to say, go for it, and be confident that that's still a good experience.
I wish she had extended that confidence to getting rid of the IM
Yeah.
at the end of the game.
That aside, which obviously I feel the same way, but in general, one of the things I appreciated most about the game was that confidence in the player and just general kind of rope extended.
Yeah.
That was something that was so unusual in a modern narrative driven game.
Yeah.
Felt just amazing to me. Relevant to this particular discussion we're having, I'm going to read another email. Oops, I just had it and then I pressed back on it and now I don't have it. Oh, here we go. Corey Fuller writes, "Hi Thumbs. Although I enjoyed it a lot, I can't help but feel I had the wrong Her Story experience. My first search term, lie, brought me to the lie detector clips, which tipped me off that the interviewee wasn't who she said she was. I got the sense of jumping straight into the endgame and didn't end up following the forensics threads I was probably expected to start with. I was wondering what you guys think of the possibility of sequence breaking in a game that is supposedly non-sequential. Obviously, a lot of effort went into subtly gating the content. Are outliers like me just the cost of giving players more freedom? Or is the problem entirely in my head because I feel like I missed the, quote, real Her Story experience? Maybe the real trick is to hide the breadcrumbs along the expected path well enough that every playthrough seems equally correct. Speaking of sequence breaking, I've been going backwards through the Idle Thumbs archives rather than limiting myself to one episode a week. A curious consequence of this is that the 2 time streams converged on E3, so for a couple weeks you guys alternated between talking about E3's 2004 and 2015.
Oh my god.
Weird.
In my memory, E3 is now just a timeless blur of anticipations for game past, present, and future without distinction. I'm pretty excited for Alien Isolation. Thanks for the show, Corey.
Awesome.
So my answer to this, I actually wish Corey would have written more about what experience he did end up having, but my answer would be, to me, for a game like this, yeah, I guess that is just the price you pay. And I think that in most of the time, that's actually a good thing. I feel like when I have experiences like that in games, it makes me even more excited. And in a game like this, Steve, like you were saying, it's not really possible to jump to something that's just going to explain the whole thing.
Yeah.
So
You might know, like, oh, she's lying about who she says she is, but that's not the whole picture that you get.
for sure.
As someone who shipped a game that had a a similar possibility for accidental sequence breaking in Gone Home. Spoilers. This is also a Gone Home spoiler cast.
Oh shit!
In the not the very first room, in the foyer of the house, the main room that connects to all the other rooms with the big staircase. If you play through the game in a normal order, you find notes and clues that bring you back into that room, and the key to the last room in the game is under the stairs in the first room behind a secret panel. But I made the design decision to say, like, if you just happen to find a secret panel ahead of time, you can still open it. There's no reason for you to know to look there, and you have to like get really close to it and blah blah blah. But if you're just like, what's this? You can open it out of order. And there are people that I know or that have written to me that have been like, I was just looking around on the floor and I was like, what's this? And I found the attic key and was like, huh? And it was really weird. Why'd you do that? And the thing that's been interesting to me is that pretty much all of those players have said, like, I could tell I wasn't supposed to be doing this in that order. Right. And so I just backed off and pretended that I hadn't gone under there. Or they, like, took the key and were like, oh, okay. And they went up and opened the attic and got to the end and were like, well, that can't be right. And then started over and like played the rest of the game. But I think that, you know, with something like the lie detector thing, I assume that most players are like, whoa, okay, it seems like I kind of jumped ahead. I should see what else is going on around this. You know, like I think that the possibility, I think it's kind of like what you were saying, Chris, like when you encounter that possibility of like, oh, I guess I can just do shit out of order. Okay. It's sort of like a surprising and maybe exciting possibility space that you're stepping into. Yeah, definitely. Because it's not just going to be like, I guess I just walk forward and do whatever the designer says. You know?
And in a game like this, where it's impossible to go as far as in Gone Home and like accidentally complete the game, like there just isn't a version of that in this game that works the same way. You could still, I think, stumble upon the fact there's a lie detector and just have a whole like without ever even like you could do that and not even necessarily think too hard about the fact that you've like sequence broken, for instance, and just keep playing through the game and just know sooner than most people that she's being dishonest. But it's a game about a murder investigation. Like it's not outrageous for a person to be lying about something. So.
Sort of weirdly in my head, I thought of this game, the structure of this game, almost like there was sort of like fog of war on a map in a strategy game or something.
Yeah, totally.
And I actually started thinking about like, okay, well, I'm clearly on the corner of the map here. When I went really far down the rabbit hole with Simon and his employer and his coworkers and all this other stuff that it didn't really go anywhere. It was kind of flavor text.
Well, and that's kind of what the interface for the like corrupted sector recovery thing was, because you are kind of
literally that. Yeah,
I like that a lot because you could find like you would find a bunch of clips that all kind of went in a row or talked about the same thing, and then you would look on the interface and there would be a bunch of clips that were like kind of clustered, you know, and it felt very much like, oh, I guess I kind of like uncovered that part of the story, but this part's still totally covered up. I wonder. And you kind of try to find the stuff that's like leading up to that, and you're like, okay, so how could I find more search terms that would like get me more into that territory, as it were?
Yeah, totally.
I thought that was cool.
That was a really cool part.
I wished that you could click on uncovered sectors just to replay that video, because I was like, oh, I just want to get back to the beginning of that thing to find, and because there were times that I had uncovered videos and then just could not remember the search term to view them again.
And I never ended up using the like playlist thing or anything. I just never bothered with that. Here's an email that I guess is closer in opinion to something Steve said, but not quite aligned with any of our stated opinions so far. So that's why I want to read it. Stephen Christie writes, "Hey Thumbs, I'm writing in anticipation of your Her Story discussion and also to thank you for the recommendation. It's incredible. What I think is remarkable about the game is how it forgoes a player character initially. For the first couple hours playing, I pretty much assumed the role of the observer, just going through these videos as I would my own computer, not playing a character. When that first message comes up asking if you have solved the case, I was instantly like, oh shit, I'm a character in this world. What's going on? Who am I? When a video game nails that kind of reveal or completely recontextualizes your actions, it is amazing. It is the best thing. I think it's really unique to video games and can be super powerful storytelling. That's all, really. Love the show. Keep it up, Stephen Christie."
I think something funny about this is also going to be a spoiler cast for Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
I haven't played that one.
So, Sam Barlow was the writer and creative director of Silent Hill Shattered Memories. I played it when it came out and thought it was really interesting and really good. It's a totally non-combat Silent Hill game. You never get weapons. It's just environmental exploration and running away from nightmare creatures that are trying to get you. But the framing device between each chapter is you in first person are being interviewed by a psychiatrist, and you answer questions or like do little like color in drawings and stuff like that, and it changes things that happen in the world. And you're playing through the whole game as the character
Henry,
that's this dude who's a Silent Hill protagonist who's kind of like going crazy or whatever in Silent Hill. And I think he's looking for his daughter.
Yes.
And so you're playing through as him, and you get all the way to the end, and you complete the game, and then there's a final psychiatrist section, and the camera pulls back, and it reveals that the person who is being interviewed in the first person the whole time by the psychiatrist wasn't the dude, it was his daughter. So same reveal at the very end.
Much,
it's like you were in first person, you were the daughter the whole time, and you didn't know it. So I thought it was really funny and interesting, and I enjoyed it that reappeared in like a very one-to-one way in her story, just as far as like me knowing Sam Barlow's past work and having played that game and stuff. I was like, is that again? And I thought it was kind of cool, just like because of that. But that said, it also is it's also a kind of a tough sell to say like you didn't know you were this character who would have known who they were all along. Like, they knew, you just didn't know, but you are them. You know, like, so I think that's a weird schism to try and walk.
It works in her story, though.
Do you think so?
I mean, because what would you... So...
I don't think it doesn't work, necessarily. I just think it's always a hard sell for there to be... There's actually a term for this. A plot twist of this type is one term for it is a tomato surprise, which is I was reading about this in the past at some point. There's a Wikipedia page and stuff for it. There's other names for it, but that's one of the more popular names. And it was based on a critic who was criticizing this kind of twist in like a facetious way, saying it's like not a good literary technique or whatever. And because they're like ad absurdum example was a story where it's told from the first person, blah, 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 story. The whole story happens, and at the end, and then they stepped on me, and I turned into ketchup, and it was like, you were a tomato all along. But like, you know, a character in the first person would have known they were a tomato. The point being, it's a twist that is predicated entirely on suppressing information from the reader that they would have actually had if they were in that situation, which this is very much the case. Like, you would have known you were her daughter the whole time, except that you're not.
So what did you think about it that worked, though, Sarah?
Because I don't know what having that knowledge that you're the daughter would have changed anything about the way that we played the game. I mean, that would have just been additional, like, okay, so there's a daughter mixed up in this somehow, but I don't know that that would have changed the way that we were searching.
It would have changed the author's access to making that a surprising twist at a intentional point in the story. It has a certain kind of artificiality to it, I think, that some other kinds of plot twists and identity twists don't necessarily have.
I think those are both fair points. So
it's Harry Mason, by the way. Sorry, I said it was Henry. It's Harry.
It's Perry Mason, actually.
Perry Mason.
Jesse,
what are you doing
writes,
in Silent Hill? Sorry.
Hi, Thumblords. My girlfriend has only ever played one video game. After listening to the excitement you guys had for her story in the last couple weeks' casts, I decided to beg and plead for her and two of her friends to give the game a chance. Although I was the only one in the room who regularly plays games, the group began quickly enthralled in the mystery unfolding. We sat around my girlfriend's tiny laptop, turned off the lights in the living room, and someone made drinks. It seems to me that the most engaging part of this game was that, especially in the beginning of the game, new pieces of the puzzle were realized at the same time by everyone, and often without any explicit discussion between us. The biggest example of this: when we understood that there was a second girl named Eve, I stood up from the couch and said, "Holy shit!" One of the girls gasped, and then everyone felt silent as we waited to type Eve or twin as our next keyword. Our anticipation was amplified by the sight of unviewed videos, and the tension created by the subtle buzzing of an old police computer gave me goosebumps all night. We played for 4 hours straight. Thanks for the smart and funny commentary over the years. It's always a highlight of my week. Be with Ragnar, Jesse from San Diego.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I wanted to read this email because it's so, for me anyway, perfectly summed up that charge you get when, like, definitely, me having played it with another person, obviously, I feel like we both had that going on, right? Where we would figure something out and we'd both be like, oh shit, it's on now.
Yeah.
And then we would you would start scribbling down things to search for, and I would start frantically typing it. And then if it resulted in like 4 out of 5 videos being new, like, oh man, we definitely have stumbled onto like a whole new thing, and this is extremely exciting.
I feel like this would be a great game to play with someone else or with a small group of people, like for that reason. Did you feel like you got a lot out of working on it together?
Yeah, I mean, because it was just a fun thing to do with your partner, and then it was, I don't know, it's just a good way to split up playing a game as well, because I'm not a person who plays a lot of games on my own, but I often watch other people play them, and there's not a lot that you can do in that kind of passive watching role. So this was just a nice way to feel like, oh, I'm participating in this in some way, even though I'm not the one at the keyboard.
Yeah. It's a good classic adventure game.
Yeah.
I mean, especially things that reward taking notes, because you can actually interact in a tactile and like active way, as opposed to even just in a normal adventure game where you're shouting things out. That already is like, I think, often pretty satisfying collaboration. But like, in addition to that, actually writing things down and like recording things and trying to make sense of it, like basically just part of the game.
This was definitely the first game since Fez that made me actually write things physically on a piece of paper next to the screen.
That's actually another, that is definitely, we didn't mention that before, but that I think is a really crucial part of the, what we're referring to as sort of confidence in the player that the game exhibits. I think the kind of game that trusts that you are going to bother putting in enough effort to like create additional interactions yourself that are not supplied by the game, in this case, just like listing things on a piece of paper or whatever system you use to organize your thoughts. That is so valuable, because I think it is generally taken as a piece of received wisdom in sort of modern video game design, that the players should not have to sort of extend their active participation beyond the screen for the most part. And in a lot of cases
outside of the actual game itself.
Right. Yeah. And in a lot of cases that makes sense, but I really find myself appreciating games that don't hold themselves to that.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any final thoughts? I have one more email that I'm going to read. But does anyone have any wrap up thoughts on this game? I guess we didn't end up really talking, like, we didn't really end up digging so much into sort of plot spoilers, but I don't know if that matters.
I mean, we did a bit. Laid into stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about what the main spoiler was.
No, I know, but I mean, like, that wasn't the principal subject of this podcast, but I think that's fine.
I feel like something that's interesting to me about, I feel like the game has a lot of potential. It implies a lot of potential to have a similar or the same structure with a different story or with different content.
I totally agree.
And like, who knows if somebody else would like basically recreate this system so that they could make her story but with different videos, or if Sam Barlow would want to make a sequel or whatever, an extension of it that was a different story in the same format or what. Like, I don't know if we'll ever have another game that's basically her story with a different story or something, but like, it does seem like one of those frameworks that you could put a ton of different kind of like video interview type of narratives like this into the structure, and it would be equally or even more interesting to like dig through them and piece them together. Like, obviously there was like production budget reasons to only have one actor on screen and so forth, but like, it could be really interesting if there were multiple characters with multiple different perspectives, kind of like Rashomon-esque, that you're digging through and trying to compare against each other, or like whatever. And I think that's really cool when you encounter something like this that's very unique unto itself, but you could see extending out to be a bunch of different cool alternate versions of itself and kind of talk about tons of different things.
I'd want to see some sort of mechanical exploration with that, not because I think that there was anything mechanically sort of missing or flawed about this game. I think its scope was actually pretty much perfect for what it was, but only because the specific limitations imposed by the games, which is what made it work, things like the lack of questioning on tape and things like the 5 search result, those things felt like such artificial limits, which, as we all said, we were all willing to accept within the context of this game. I think as kind of genre pillars, I would be a lot less willing to just constantly accept arbitrary fictional limitations like that in every game. So I'd want to see some exploration of this general concept applied in pretty different ways. But I agree with you that this like basic format of FMV, who the hell would have thought we would be talking about like, why don't people make some more FMV games like this? I mean, but yeah, it's a really potent format.
I mean, not to go too specific on that, but I think that it's the kind of thing like you see with many genres where everything about this experience, the format of it, had to be justified within the fiction to set up those rules. Like, it's an old computer and XYZ, but I feel like you could
no cell phones in horror movies.
Well, or I mean, the one I always go back to is Lakitu holding the camera in Mario 64. It's like that's why a camera can float around you. Games after that, you didn't have to explain why the camera was floating around; it just does.
So all of them.
I could see.
I don't agree that that's the same thing.
The reason being, the direction I'm going with this is saying I think you could play her story, which has in-fiction justification for limited clips and the other and not hearing the interviewer and stuff, and take a next step where all that shit is just abstracted out and there's no excuse for why it is. It's not within an interface. It's not a desktop sim. It's just like, you've played this before. It has limitations that are limitations because they're the rule set of the thing. Because I agree that it would be very grating if you had to make an excuse for those rules every time you made one of these things. But I think a different approach could be to just say, we don't need excuses for them anymore. They're the rules because they're the limitations that we've chosen. We can have this as a purely abstract frame because it's been established. It's really hard for me to know how I'd feel about that in the abstract, because it feels, maybe I only say it, maybe it only feels this way to me because now it's as part of the fabric of sort of game mechanics. But like, the Lakitu thing feels different to me in the sense that truly is a meta element that is, if Lakitu doesn't exist, that is actually totally irrelevant to the fiction of the game. Like, there is no, like, if you actually feel the need to explain why the camera can spin around, why is there a camera at all, who's watching this, like, that all just kind of gets kind of weird. Like, why is the person watching also weirdly passively controlling the character at the same? That stuff feels so removed from the actual fiction that it doesn't even, that the explanation to me feels more like a cute thing rather than this explains it for all games to come. Whereas the 5 search limit in her story, that feels to me, it's so relevant to the actual specific fiction of the game, which is that you are searching a database that
was made in the 90s.
It feels a little harder for that to just become a default. This is how things are in this sort of game mechanic system. But I don't know if I feel that way. I would want to see some other people make these games, and then maybe this is actually not a problem at all. Yeah. I do think the FMV thing is incredibly valuable to say, like, oh, right, I agree. We don't have to have 3D Think
models.
About how terrible this would have been if it were it were modeled and rigged and animated with real-time 3D. Yeah. Oh my God! Think about how garbage and impossible to take seriously this game would have been. Yep. Like I've seen some people criticize the sort of hammy acting and stuff, and like, okay, whatever. Imagine how shitty this would have been if it was like other video games.
Yep. Five Nights at Freddy's,
It definitely made it feel more
like... Well, Five Nights at Freddy's is supposed to be Uncanny Valley.
No, I know. I'm saying that's why he ended up making those games. It would get there unintentionally.
Right,
yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that actually seeing a real human woman on screen made it feel more like you were part of the detective story, part of that kind of reality that you were talking about. I know that in the episode that you guys first brought up her story, you talked about the acting, and I just want to say again that woman impressed me to such a high degree. I don't understand the criticism of her acting being hammy, because I thought it was perfect for what you needed from that story. I was just blown away by it.
TM.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Like I I believed her. And even if I ever felt like it was very heightened, which the entire experience is very heightened and very melodramatic. And, like, let's be real here. This woman had to pretend that she believed in fairy tales and other stuff like that. Like, she really made it work, I think.
Well, that is her job.
With what she had. No, yeah. I know that's her job. I'm just saying I think she did a very admirable job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but regardless of the specifics of her performance or her as an individual or the story being told or whatever, I feel like her story is just a really good reminder of like, oh, right, using actual video of actual human beings can be incredibly powerful in ways that games kind of set aside for a long time since the FMV crash, where it was like, FMV, you don't do that shit.
Because it kind of never really hit on what could be good and meaningful about that in the first place.
Right.
Because so frequently FMV games weirdly dispensed with things like actual sets and was like, what if we reintroduce crappy CG back into this and therefore make it look artificial and all these things we were trying to avoid? Bad move.
Yeah.
People.
Well, and also, why don't we put videos in between you playing Wing Commander or whatever? Not like, how can we make the interactive experience about manipulating these video clips, you know?
There's a really interesting sort of counterpoint to this, or not a counterpoint, it's supporting this point, but
so the opposite
there's a video, sorry, I'm a little bit tired. There's a video that I watched today that is about how, people complain often about CG in movies, and actually it can be used very artfully, and often lots of background elements can be made to, make a scene really kind of come alive and spice up and everything like that. And the main point that the person who put that video together, and I'm blanking on their name, but I can find it and everything, is that CG should only ever be, sort of a tool in the filmmaker's tool belt, in the same way that, hey, video could actually just be a tool in the game designer's tool belt. Thank you, dude, whose name I really wish I remembered right now, because it's a great video that actually makes a good point.
All right. Well, I am going to go out on an email that is that I enjoyed for its light chastising of our tardiness. Brian Laframboise writes, Dear Idle Thumbs, last week you asked if anyone still cared about her story.
You or him?
That was me. Last week you asked if anyone still cared about her story. Let me tell you a story. My wife is casually into video games, and lately we've both been enjoying Sherlock Holmes' Consulting Detective, and she really dug Serial, so when I heard about her story, I picked it up thinking she'd enjoy it. I was right, she loved it. We played through the whole game that day, and she instantly began seeking out online discussions of the game to check out her theories against the other theories of the game narrative. Now, we're about to move from Toronto to Vancouver, and so in preparation for the 4,400-kilometer drive, that's 2,700 miles for the metrically disinclined, I queued up all the latest Idle Thumbs episodes alongside other podcasts so we could listen to the promised Her Story discussion together, thinking it would bring her happiness during the long voyage. While she isn't big into video game podcasts, she has occasionally enjoyed Idle Thumbs, especially the intro music, and was willing to listen to however many episodes it took.
Just mention that because he does the intro music.
Yeah. It wasn't in the email.
It's in the email. While she isn't big into video game podcasts, she has occasionally enjoyed Idle Thumbs, especially the intro music, and was willing to listen to however many episodes it took to get some witty and insightful Her Story analysis. Each day we'd put one Idle Thumbs episode into rotation, and each day was met with sadness, as the promised Her Story discussion never materialized. She did enjoy your Fallout Shelter misadventures, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to know you've made 6 days of driving less entertaining in hopes of guilting you into some Her Story talk. No hard feelings, smiley face. Love the podcast. Keep up the great work the last few weeks notwithstanding. Knuckly yours, Brian Laframboise.
That poor woman. I feel really bad for her right now.
Brian and...
Just got to move back to Toronto. Try it again. Put this on.
They just really need to do a 15-minute drive.
Go
listen to it.
True.
Yeah.
So I found that person's...
however long this has been going on.
We've been talking for like an hour.
Well, yeah, time flies when you're having so much fun on Idle Thumbs. So just so you know...
the tagline for the podcast...
Time flies when you're having so much fun
with Idle Thumbs.
The CGI person is Rocket Jump Film School's Freddie Wong. So you can
Freddie Wong.
Find out that... Yeah, check out that video.
I've
it's
seen
been going around.
Kind of stuff.
It's pretty decent.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Idle News Pod Blast Her Story Spoilercast finally delivered as promised.
Time really flies when you're having so much fun with idle thumbs.
So true. Thanks to everyone here in the room for participating, and thanks for listening if you, in fact, listened. Also, if you, because apparently Her Story was the official game to like, to sort of drag other people into video games. If you have been dragged into listening to this, we do a weekly video game podcast called Idle Thumbs. It is part of our larger Idle Thumbs network that has several shows about video games, as well as also various shows about TV series, currently including our week-by-week watch of the second season of True Detective Weekly. You can find all of our podcasts about games and television at idlethumbs.net. And if you like any of them, please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes. It helps a lot. It is the best way that we find new listeners to get our shows out there. Yep. So
to ensorcel with our dulcet
Yes.
tones. Also, I won't be there. So if you didn't like me, I'm on hardly any of the episodes. So don't worry about it.
True. All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Do you think you understand why we recorded this podcast?
Right in. The questions about that. There's only one real answer, though.